Hi guys, it's Dylan from Bijou Diamond Jewellery in London with another watch video, and today we're taking a look at the Patek Philippe Celestial Reference 5102. As with all my reviews, let's go back in time now and take a look at the history of this watch. And we're going to go back to the early 2000s, which is when Patek Philippe released a pretty revolutionary, incredible timepiece called the Sky Moon Tourbillon. And the Sky Moon Tourbillon was the reference 5002. It was an insane piece of craftsmanship and work of art in a way, and obviously watchmaking. It featured essentially two watches sandwiched together. Very, very complex. Many parts went into making this watch. But the side of this watch that we're interested in is the Sky Moon side, which featured an incredible celestial dial, which allowed the wearer to actually be able to tell not only what phase the moon was in, but also where it was sitting in the night sky, and also where the Milky Way galaxy or all the stars in the sky were sitting as well, just by looking at your wrist. So incredibly complex. I think when they were developing the watch, Patek Philippe realized that there was 25 billion, or trillion, I think, potentials or arrangements on this watch. So incredibly difficult to manufacture and create. But off the back of the success of that 5002, they decided to create a watch called the 5102 in 2002, which is the watch that we're looking at to do, the 5102. The watch was first released in white gold, and it featured essentially the Sky Moon side of the 5002, the Sky Moon Tourbillon. So it allowed people to buy into that watch for a much lower price point. It stayed in production, or the white gold stayed in production until 2007, so for 5 years, when it was then replaced by the yellow gold version, which only was in production for 2 years until 2009, and only around 200 of those examples exist out there. So very rare watch in yellow gold. In 2009, the yellow gold was replaced by the platinum and rose gold bimetal version, which is an interesting looking watch, not my personal favorite, but personally I prefer the single metal, like the yellow gold or the white gold versions. In 2012 though, again only 3 years later after the platinum was introduced, they phased out the 5102 and replaced it with the new 6102. And one of the main differences on that watch that Patek Philippe updated was the additional of a date function on the watch. So that concludes the very basic history of this watch. I'm not going to go too in depth about complications and grand complications from Patek Philippe. Let's move on to the features of this watch. Obviously there's tons to talk about. I'll also teach you how to set the watch as well, which is a really interesting procedure. So starting as always with the clasp on this watch is a really lovely Calatrava cross in white gold, 18 karat white gold. It's a deployant clasp, so it means it's very easy to take on and off. It feels very beautifully machined. It is of course a scratch magnet though, being kind of the extremities of the strap. It does stick out a little bit as well, just the way that the actual clasp innards are manufactured. It does mean it sticks out a little bit from your wrist, but it's not too bad. Personally, I prefer the normal buckle that they offer, but this definitely feels far more luxurious, definitely suits the absolute incredible aura that this watch has and the kind of gravitas that this watch has. It is a really powerful timepiece, and I feel like you could only really place it with the Calatrava cross deployant clasp. Moving on to our strap, we've got a gorgeous deep blue, kind of midnight blue leather, I believe it's crocodile strap, which is just so stunning. Obviously very luxurious. The deep blue ties in wonderfully with the deep blue dial on this watch too. It just feels extremely luxurious and just very classy. The quality of Patek Philippe leather straps is always the top end, really stunning quality, and it just feels fantastic on the wrist. And they start to loosen up with age as well and feel very supple and comfortable as well, which is fantastic. The case on this watch is a pretty unique looking case. We've got those kind of riveted on or welded on lugs on this watch, which makes it feel quite rugged and hard and bold, rather than kind of elegant and subtle like some of the other watches in the collection. So that's definitely, for me, the lugs is the first thing I notice on this watch. They are just such a unique shape, and the way they interact with the case is, yeah, very unique. The case is also beautifully machined and carved and crafted. It's a mixture between sandblasted and polished effect or finish. Majority of the watch is in polish finish. The sides of the case have this amazing engraved Calatrava cross kind of motif going all the way around the case, which just looks absolutely brilliant, and it's so beautiful. And the innards of that Calatrava cross design are sandblasted, and in the outer sections, so the actual crosses themselves, are in a polished finish, which makes it, or gives it, this amazing contrast. Really brings out those crosses so much. It looks really beautiful. The case is quite big at 43 millimeters. So for me, with a wrist size of 16.5 centimeters in circumference, this is definitely a watch that I probably would shy away from as a result of it being on the larger side compared to what I prefer. However, it definitely doesn't feel that big when you put it on. It's not like a Audemars Piguet 43 millimeter. It feels much smaller than that. It feels like almost an AP 40 mil or something. So yeah, it definitely wears smaller than its actual case diameter. The case is of course in 18 karat white gold as well. Yeah, overall finished absolutely stunningly. On the back of the case we have a clear crystal case back showing off the amazing complex movement. It doesn't look particularly detailed like maybe a manual movement from back here, but it is obviously an incredible timepiece inside and out, and it's nice that they've allowed us to look at that. The case also has this rounded kind of bezel as well, which is lovely. It almost feels like this smoothed out bezel is a window that you're looking through, maybe in like an observatory or something like that, in a science lab, or looking out into space. It's almost like a window into space, maybe even inside a spaceship as well. It has just a very beautiful kind of elegant machine-like feel to it. The actual crystal as well is quite tinted. It's funny, in certain light the watch looks extremely dark and it's very difficult to see anything. It almost does look like a night sky because the gold of the stars and the moon always pops through, but sometimes you just barely see the actual dial or the lower layers of the dial, and then in sunlight you get such a sheen and shine off the dial. It looks totally different. So yeah, it's a very versatile and kind of almost always changing dial. It's got so much character, which is just brilliant. The case does also have two crowns as well. That's probably something you'd notice almost immediately about it. One crown is obviously for adjusting the time and also winding the watch, and then the other crown is for adjusting the moon phase, or the moon on the dial, and also the sky, or sky phase, whatever you would like to call it. So let's move now on to the centerpiece of this watch, which of course is the dial, and I'll come on to how to set the whole watch in a second as well. The dial on this watch just shows, or in essence, the functionality of this watch is time in hours and minutes with the two hands at the center of the dial, and then also showing you the moon phase and also where the moon sits in the sky, and also where the Milky Way is sitting in the sky as well. So, and that sky is essentially denoted or shown by, or demonstrated by, the small, thin oval shape that's towards the top of the dial. That's actually what we see in our night sky, and it specifically shows the northern hemisphere as well. The actual dial construction is pretty complex to be able to show all those bits of information cleanly and accurately. It's split up into a few different thin layers of crystal, basically, or sapphire, in order to show that different dimension and also be able to control each layer. So we'll start with the base layer, is obviously that nice stunning deep blue, which makes you think about space and the sky, and yeah, it's very, very romantic and beautiful, and ties in again really stunningly with that strap. Just above that we have a layer, or two layers of crystal or glass, that control the moon and the moon's phase. The lower layer is essentially one sheet with lots of darker and lighter moons, so dark circles and actual full moons in gold, and that rotates around the dial depending on where you rotate the crown. And then you've also got a window above that, so a layer above that is this kind of window that looks through and allows us to only see certain parts of the moon, in its different stages, so we get to see each phase. So essentially that window controls what phase we see of the moon. And that again moves independently of the bottom layer, or the layer below that. Above that layer we also have our stars, or our sky kind of section, again controlled by the crown. And then above that we have another layer that shows the north, east, south, west, at the top of the dial, also the oval semicircle, which shows us which area of the sky we're looking at, and also our Patek Philippe logo down the bottom of the dial. Pretty complex overall, very, very beautifully done though, absolutely exquisite. All the different gold details, it is just truly such a beautiful dial. And then above those sky sections there, we have a outer ring which shows the Roman numerals, which allows you to tell the time. And just inside of that, we have a very thin little tiny inner ring, which shows us all the tiny little increments, and it's got major increments which are every 12 minor increment essentially, and that goes all the way around the edge of the dial. And that's how we set our sky and moon incredibly accurately, so that literally any time, not only day of the year or day of the month, we can also tell exactly where the moon and sky is at that particular time as well of day. So pretty incredible. Moving on now to the functions on how to set this watch. So just briefly to recap what functions this watch has. It's got hours and minutes, so at the center of the dial with the two hands, which are these beautiful skeletonized hands that allows you to see straight through them and onto the most important part of the dial, which is of course the stars and the moon. We also have a sky phase, so shows us where the stars are in the sky and the Milky Way, and also where our moon is in the sky, and also what phase the moon is in. So 4 functions in essence. And then on the newer one, we also have the date function as well. Again, this is only for the northern hemisphere though, so if you're in the southern hemisphere, this will not be the correct sky for you. And to adjust everything on the watch, or our different functions on the watch, to adjust the sky and the moon, to adjust the moon, we turn the crown at 4 o'clock, so the lower crown clockwise, and to adjust the sky, we turn the crown down at 4 o'clock anti-clockwise. To adjust the time, we use the crown at the top in the normal fashion that we normally adjust time. With the crowns pushed in, or the top crown pushed in, is how you wind the watch as well. Moving on now to how we set the watch. So first things first, this is a little bit of a complex process, and it's very important you do it in this particular order, as this will avoid damaging the movement. If you don't do it in this order, you will risk damaging the movement. So first things first, we need to ensure that the watch has been wound. If you haven't been wearing it, or it's not been on a watch winder, which I would recommend for a watch that's this complex to set, then use the crown at the top to wind the watch a few turns, maybe 20-30 turns, just so you know the watch definitely has some energy in that spring. Once the watch is wound, you can then begin to set the different functions, and it has to be done in a very specific order, like I said, in order to avoid damage to the movement. So once you've wound the crown, you then need to set the moon to a full moon. In order to do that, you need to pull out the crown down at 4 o'clock and rotate that crown clockwise. It may require up to 28 turns of the moon around the dial, so actual rotations of the moon around the dial, almost 28 times, depending on where the moon was already set. But your aim is to get the moon to be a full moon inside that window, and it needs to sit directly underneath the south marker at the top of the dial. So the S marker at the top of the dial, it has to sit right underneath there. So I've already set this, but during the time that I was doing the video, the moon has already advanced slightly beyond the S marker, but that's okay for this demonstration. Just imagine that it is sitting directly under the S marker. So using the Patek Philippe website, go on to the 6102 reference page, or the product page for that watch. And at the bottom of the page, it will show you how to set the timepiece. And I've set in the time of day that this video was filmed, and also the day of the month and the year, etc., in the drop-down menus. And it then produces some data, some 5 different numbers. A number at the which shows you full rotations, and then 2 sets of 2 numbers, 2 for the moon, 2 for the sky. And we'll just go through those now so you can understand what each thing means. So once we've got our moon set to the full moon, just sitting underneath the south marker at the top, we then look at the Patek Philippe website. At the top of those 5 numbers on the website, we have a number 8 in this example, or next to it says moon revolutions, or full revolutions, phase revolutions in essence. And that basically means we have to send the moon around the dial 8 times. The number will be different for you depending on what time of day and year, and etc. But for us in this example, it is 8. So I need to now wind the moon around 8 times around the dial. And then once we've done it 8 times, we then land it underneath the south marker, again, the S marker on the dial, and let it sit there. Next, we look at the next section, and here we have 5 large and 4 small divisions. So 5 large divisions, 4 small divisions under the moon section, so the next section of the part of the watch that we need to set. So in order to do this, we need to look at the outside section of the dial, which is where we see lots of little small indicators. The scale basically is made up of lots of small markers and large markers. So it's for every 12 small markers, you get 1 large marker. So now turning the crown again in the clockwise direction and using the small tiny arrow just above the moon, we then align or move the small arrow past 5 large divisions till we get to the 5th large division, and then once we get to the 5th large division, we then carefully and slowly rotate the moon pointer or the indicator 4 more small divisions, so the tiny little divisions, which is difficult to do. It is very, very small and detailed, but it's important you do that in order to have the fullest accuracy in terms of what the moon is displaying on your dial. Now the moon is set, we can move on to adjusting the sky. The sky has a small triangular indicator, so just ensure that you've rotated the indicator to the 12 o'clock position, so just underneath the south marker or around the south marker. In order to do that, we rotate the crown now anti-clockwise rather than clockwise. So rotate that triangle to north, or to south, sorry, to 12 o'clock position, and then you just need to rotate now in the same style that we did before, but now I'm rotating the crown anti-clockwise and looking again at our data on the Patek Philippe website. We see here we have 3 large indicators and 0 small indicators. So we need to rotate round the sky indicator until we pass or get to the 3rd large indicator, and in this case we have 0 small, so we stick it on that 3rd large indicator. And that is now your sky and your moon set. And once you've done that, you then need to press in the crown again to ensure that everything is locked off and sealed and you can't accidentally knock it. Then once the sky and the moon are complete, you can then adjust the time using the crown at the 2 o'clock position, so the upper crown, and again pull it out gently and rotate it around until you get the desired time. Don't worry, changing the time does not adjust your moon and sky phase. They are separately done together. And that's it. That's how to set your Patek Philippe Celestial 5102. And the same is also for 6102 as well, apart from the fact that you also have the date function on top. So that completes the features of the watch, the history of the watch, and how to set it. Let's take a look now whether or not I would own this watch. I would definitely own this watch. I think it's an incredible piece of workmanship and artistry. It is truly a stunning timepiece, and I think it would be an absolute honor to own such a magical timepiece like this. The watch is of course expensive, but I think for collectors that already have a large majority of the Grand Complications or normal complications in the watch, in Patek Philippe's collection, this is perhaps the next step for you. You might want something just as special as this. The fantastic thing that I love about this watch is that it definitely doesn't shout that it's as expensive as it is. You know, being in this white gold, which is the variation I would definitely own, it definitely is an extremely subtle timepiece, and never really when you're wearing it do you think about how much it is actually worth. Again, 43mm case diameter, much larger watch really than I would normally wear. It definitely doesn't feel like that, and you do get lost in that incredible, beautiful dial. So in a way, it never really feels too big for your wrist. It just always looks fantastic. It's definitely a bold, strong, brilliant timepiece that has just such an elegance about it. Really, really cool timepiece. If you get the honor of being able to see one in real life, you'll understand how magical this timepiece is. In essence, definitely I would own one. Thanks guys for watching. Let us know in the comments what you think about this Celestial 5102. Would you own one? Would you maybe own the 6102 over this? Personally, I would own this, as I'm not too bothered about the date function. I actually prefer the fact that this is a much cleaner, simpler dial. I just don't love the Roman numerals around the edge. Let us know what other watches you'd like us to review in the Patek Philippe collection, and as always, if you're interested in this watch or any other watch in the collection, then please don't hesitate to contact us. Our details are in the description, and also at the end of the video, it'd be a pleasure to call this watch into stock for you.